Are those all your kids?
Those are my sons, wife's offering, brother and sisters.
Brothers and sisters?
My adoption.
Okay. Ah.
Yeah, when they see the age of my son, and I tell them that my grandchildren here are sisters, and it's like, whoa! It doesn't compute very well. That's okay. I got that whole family out fast.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Yes, those were once again, for the fourth or fifth time, the last rose of winter or summer. Those were at Couch Pharmacy. I had to pick up a prescription for Tara, and they had like a whole row of rose bushes, so I didn't figure they'd miss a couple. So they're a little bedraggled because I put my coat on in the top, and I came home by mistake.
So it was nice that you brought
It's always nice to have fresh flowers.
There he is. The angel.
I got one this time, thanks. All right, welcome to First Universalist of New Madison. On the first day of winter, what a surprise. I was picking up a prescription at Couch, and for the fourth or fifth time, the last rose of summer, they happen to have rose bushes there that were blooming, so I snipped off a few. I don't think they'll even mind, and I don't think they'd notice, even if they would mind. So, beautiful roses, and I'm going to have to start figuring out what species or genus or whatever that is so I can get some planted, because mine never last that long. All right, do we have any announcements? Yes.
Reminder that the Sunday after Thanksgiving will be a joint service at the El Dorado Church, and there will be a meal afterwards. The Women's Association at the El Dorado Church said they would like to provide most of the food, even though we got labeled as a pitch-in, and that the New Madison folks should just feel free to show up and enjoy the day.
But I'm sure they're not going to castigate you if you bring something.
Now, if you bring something, they won't shove you back out the door.
That's right.
But
they may put it on the table back in the corner but
they wanted to show some hospitality, so they said, let them know that they can just show up and not worry about food.
And I think we always feel welcome at El Dorado, and I want to extend an invitation to anybody at El Dorado if they want to come and hear Derek. I know he's pretty popular wherever he goes. So they can always come here on the off Sunday and listen here. And we still have our day-old donuts for anybody that wants them. All right, the other announcements. Our welcome is 458 in the back of your hymnal. Mindful of truth ever exceeding our knowledge, and community ever exceeding our practice, reverently we covenant together, beginning with ourselves as we are, to share the strength of integrity and the heritage of the Spirit in the unending quest for wisdom and love. That's by Walter Royal Jones, Jr. Our prelude is so appropriate for today, Troika Ride. First, it's a Ukrainian folk tune. And troika, if you're not familiar with it, if you've seen the old triptychs or the old pictures of Russia, a troika is 3 horses abreast. Typically, it can be a carriage, but typically you see it in the winter the first winter sleigh ride, and the first snow of the winter has inspired me. I'll be heading up to Indiana to get my sleigh, so hopefully we'll be able to have a sleigh ride here if the snow will stick around for us this winter. All right, Troika ride.
I'm going to play 2 songs this morning, 2 short songs. I'm going to play Troika Ride, which Tim explained is the Ukrainian song, and I'm going to play the Gypsy, which is Hungarian. The Troika Ride has words to it, which I will speak, and also with the Gypsy. So I have 2 songs for you this morning, and I'll be speaking about them. Thank you. Troika Ride is first. That was the Ukrainian folk song. Now I'm going to play a Hungarian folk song called The Gypsy. All the people crowd about. Play a lively tune, they shout. They are eager to dance. Margaret gave me this music, and I liked it so much.
It brings back memory of Nutcracker and Fiddler on the Roof.
Things like that.
Between both of them. All right. And speaking of the Troika, that was kind of a coincidence. I just happened to go through my pictures and pulled out this picture of Curly after one of his races, all lathered up with his tongue hanging out. That's what the horse pulling the Troika, one of the 3 horses pulling the Troika, looks like after a long run. So I just threw that in for the fun of it. Derek is speaking on Everyone Still Lives Here. It's kind of an election-related thing.
Post-election.
Post-election, which we are post-election. Does everybody recognize what this is?
It's been the eclipse.
Last Tuesday we had a full lunar eclipse. Normally I don't get up real early in the morning, but I worked the polls in New Madison, and surprisingly, well, it wasn't surprising, I guess it was surprising how long it lasted. I had to be there at 5:30 in the morning, and we didn't leave till 8 o'clock that night. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, as I was feeding the horse and heading to New Paris, I got to see the eclipse of the moon. But I couldn't get a good place, and my hand was too shaky, and my phone is too cheap to get actually a good picture of it, so I pulled this picture off the internet. So, the moon phase has changed, and sometimes a red moon is a portent. I was really worried about an evil portent, and we're still not sure that it's not going to be partially evil, but it was never as bad as it was predicted to be. All right, our chalice lighting, Invoking Thoreau by Ben Sewell. Let us hold a quiet moment now as we light our chalice. Henry David Thoreau wrote in his journal on February 2nd, 1841, a child asked his father what became of the old moon, and he said it was cut up into stars. Consider the light, light out of darkness, light begets light. The light which the God of Genesis brought out of the darkness is the light that became our world. Our sun's light reflecting off our moon is eclipsed, but then returns to us as our earth quietly moves out of its way. In our current scientific understanding of the origins of the universe, the light of everything that exploded from not quite nothing is the light that became the maybe everything of which we are barely a part. This light we now kindle here will become a light for each of us to carry forth as we find our way through the shadows of our path. Let us be grateful for the light in our lives, even as we honor the dark from which the light came. Our opening hymn is 142. To 1976. So the questions, the problems, the dangers that we face in the world don't seem to change much. Another thing that I kind of threw in extraneously, this is a farm in southern Ohio, and if you can read it, it says, American farmers feed the world. I think everybody knows what hubris is. Have you paid attention to what's going on in the Ukraine and how much food, how many ships, like hundreds of ships carrying grain, the Russians had stopped from going to Africa. And now they've decided to start to let those ships pass through again. So we're not sure whether that food is going to reach Africa or not. But it looks to me like Ukraine is feeding a big part of the world when they feed the African continent. So I'm not saying we don't contribute. I'm not saying we don't send food all over the world. But we need to remember that we as a country, as a nation, as a state, as a county, as a city, are just a small part of a big whole, and we have a responsibility to the entire whole, not just to our part. Okay, our affirmation is number 666, which, it's like the elevators that there is no 13th floor in a lot of buildings. I'm surprised. I guess that's the bravery of the Unitarian Universalists, is they'll stick it right in there. The legacy of caring. Despair is my private pain, born from what I have failed to say, failed to do, and failed to overcome. Be still, my inner self. Let me rise to you. Let me reach down into your pain and soothe you. I turn to you to renew my life. I turn to the world, the streets of the city, the worn tapestries of brokerage firms, drug dealers, private estates, personal things in the bag lady's cart. Rage and pain in the faces that turn from me, afraid of their own inner worlds. This common world I love anew, as the lifeblood of generations who refuse to surrender their humanity in an inhumane world courses through my veins. From within this world, my despair is transformed into hope, and I begin anew the legacy of caring. Dara Bandeka. I don't know who that is, but I may go look it up.
I could tell you.
Yes, please.
She was a UU theologian who worked at Meadville Lombard Theological School. She did a lot of her work in the late 90s and early 2000s and has since retired, and I think is in somewhat of a state of seclusion. I have not known her to do any public appearances since, maybe about 2006.
Sounds like she has some struggles, and she definitely has the heart and the mind and the soul of a poet. So very interesting, and that is the value and the notoriety of poetry, is it brings things that you wouldn't think would be connected at all. It puts them together in odd and unusual ways, which stimulate your thinking. Okay, our children's story is once again Storyberries. It'll play.
To Catch a Moon by Phoebe Coughlin. The night sky's an ocean, she's endless and deep. Her heart is the moon, glowing bright as we sleep. It's magic, breathed Anna. Let's catch it, said Will, for it's floating right there at the top of the hill. So just before bedtime they ran up the mound and leapt for the moon, pushed their feet off the ground. Their fingers clasped only the thin, empty air. So they climbed up a tree, tried to catch it from there. But as they climbed higher, the moon sailed away. Further and further away did it stray. We're tiny, frowned Anna. We can't reach the sky. So let's send our toys, all the ones that can fly. And up in the air whooshed their kite and balloon, as they raced on their way to be first to the moon. The kite strings got tangled and twisted in trees. Their balloon disappeared, carried off by a breeze. Their model plane soared, then fell from the sky, and the children trudged home with a shrug and a sigh. Let's build our own moon. Yes, that's what we'll do, beamed Will, grabbing cardboard, tinfoil and glue. Then carving a circle, enormous and round, they conjured their own silver moon on the ground. And lying upon it, they slept through the night, beneath the sky's twinkling blanket of light. And dreaming of stars and the power to fly, they sailed out to space on their moon in the sky. The end.
The end.
Thank you for reading with Storyberries.com. Free stories for kids.
So, everything is lunar today. Joys and concerns. We always start with Ukraine. Harrison has been retaken by the Ukrainians, which is pretty amazing. A little thing of Ukraine against the country of Ukraine against the monstrous state of Russia and all the states that Russia controls. It does kind of get some kind of clue as there might be some justice in the world, but just because they've taken one town does not mean there's anywhere close to a resolution. Part of the problem is the Ukrainians say on the demand for retribution or the demand for peace talks that the Russians have to give back all the territory they've taken, pay reparations, and apologize for invading. We all know that is never going to happen, so until we can reach some sort of accommodation as to a reasonable discussion between the two, I'm afraid this will continue, and it is not good. Our coats, hopefully, and hats that we sent, hopefully we'll get there in time. I'm sure the money will get there in time that we sent. It's going to be a hard winter. They are attacking the electric grids and the heating supplies. So almost 40 or 50% of the country is without electricity, which is pretty amazing in the wintertime. All right, anything else?
I'd just like to mention, I suppose post-Veterans Day, we continue to honor those who served our country so well. But I attended, and I believe Roberto as well yesterday, attended a wonderful museum, a program at Garst Museum, and it was entitled Air, Land, and Sea, Brothers by Blood and in Arms. And I don't know if you read any brief publicity on it, but it basically featured how 5 brothers from Longtown, Ohio, forged a path to protect our country. And 3 of those 5 brothers were honored specifically through a lecture by family members, what have you, Roy Spicer, Russell Spicer, and Cecil Spicer. There were 2 additional brothers from Longtown, and what a wonderful program and what a great service to our country and hearing about their lives.
Great. Yeah, we want to light a candle for all the veterans. Madison does a good job. They have the banners up with all the veterans. That is very appropriate and appreciated. And the Garst Museum, we were there. We had our little tour of the Garst Museum. We can do that again for anybody that missed it. Very informational, much bigger on the inside than it looks from the outside. They have multiple exhibits. Greenville's history. Included is information on Annie Oakley, which was kind of surprising. And most surprising to me was the Mount Palomar telescope that was so big it had to be transported on a railroad car. It was built in Greenville. How about that? Anything else?
I think we're going to think about Biden and his meeting with the Chinese, whatever he is.
Zhou Enlai, yeah, the premier from China. Yeah, our thoughts are with our president, who is at first of all, they're at the meeting of all the nations working on global control, climate control. Still people not believing that climate change is taking effect. If you saw the news pictures, I guess we need to light a candle for the people of Florida. Their second hurricane in, 6 weeks, and it hit the east coast of Florida. They showed pictures on the news. People who had 40 or 50 yards of beach or a cliff between their house and the ocean edge, between those 2 storms, their houses are collapsing into the ocean. It took like 40 yards of sand and dunes and just washed it away. And I'll never forget the picture of those nice big fancy house with the in-ground swimming pool. In the in-ground swimming pool, there's nothing underneath it. There's a few poles holding it up, and it's just dangling there over the dirt, and the ocean is lapping at the bottom of it. We still don't have the power to defeat Mother Nature, unless you're Dutch, and I'm not sure how they're going to make it through all of this. Just to throw an interesting sidelight in on ethics, how many of you know that, I'm sure you do, that the Russians have stopped shipping natural gas to Europe, and there's a real shortage, and they're worried about their industrial production and just keeping warm in the winter. The Dutch are sitting on a huge deposit of natural gas, but when they started to pump it out through fracking, they started to have earthquakes, and some people's houses got cracks in the walls, and many people's houses got cracks in the walls. So the Dutch passed a rule that they couldn't take that natural gas out. So here we have the dilemma of, do you sacrifice your physical property for the physical well-being of other people in other countries, Or do you say we're not pumping that natural gas even though it's needed because I don't want to get a crack in the wall of my house? The Dutch have always been known for being pretty ethical people, but like any ethical people, if you look at what happened during World War II, there were Dutch collaborators. So no nation is perfect, ours included. All right. I guess I'm rattling on today for some reason. A candle for those wishes, desires, fears, and trepidations which we are not able to speak. Maybe we're not even able to face on our own. We are here to help if we can. All right, our message from Derek, who we love to have, and we're looking forward to hearing Everyone Still Lives Here.
As I usually say, a thank you to the El Dorado congregation for releasing me to come and serve up here about once a month. I usually introduce my sermon with a reading. Today's reading is from the first letter of St. John. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers and sisters are liars. After all, those who do not love their brothers and sisters whom they've seen can hardly love God whom they have not seen. This commandment we have also: those who claim to love God ought to love their brother and sister also. So, a while back, a handwritten envelope addressed to me arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting had that kind of cursive flourish that makes me think of a high school student who just discovered calligraphy. It's a little kind of overdone. The return address and postmark were from nearby Cambridge City. So, who did I know from Cambridge City? And who, I wondered, had taken the time to write me a note and mail it to me? Well, inside, written in the same script on ruled yellow paper, was a note from a guy named Pete, who turned out to be representing a company that does bathroom remodeling. He included a business card with another cursive note scrawled on the back inviting me for a free estimate. Now, I told you that the envelope and the letter and the business card all had handwriting on them. Or at the very least, they looked that way at first. I had been fooled. On close inspection, there was no indentation on the page from the pressure of a pen. The handwriting on the envelope, the letter, the business card were a convincing simulation of handwriting, produced by a high-end printer, employing techniques to imitate a real person's handwriting. And I'm going to reasonably assume that many of my neighbors got the exact same envelope and letter, but with their names on them instead of mine. Pete had sent me a personalized letter, meaning that it was specifically targeted to me, specifically, by name. These targeted letters were produced by a computer and a printer and likely sent to homeowners of record in a certain zip code with a certain economic profile. These letters were targeted at the kind of people who not only might like a remodeled bathroom, but who might be able to afford a remodeled bathroom. The letter was personalized, targeted specifically to me by name. But it was not personal. It was not grounded in any kind of authentic relationship. In fact, it was a little bit deceptive. It wanted me to think I was getting mail from somebody I had some kind of real-life connection with. But I can tell you that Pete in Cambridge City doesn't know me at all. We've never met. He, or whoever he contracts for his marketing, knows a few specific things about me. My name, my address, that I am a homeowner, but he does not know me. And here stands one of the really big problems of our present age. One that I've been thinking about for the last 4 or 6 years every time we go through an election cycle. People in our nation know some targeted things about other people, but we don't really know each other. We don't see each other as persons quite often. We might see some demographic data points, party labels, ideologies, memberships in movements of different kind, which is a very limited understanding of who you are, who I am, who everybody out there is. And after elections, people end up having feelings about other people. Sometimes feelings about targeted sets of people. With some people, we feel congratulatory. Yay! With others, we feel dread and condemnation. We boil down who they are, perhaps with how they voted. Those people who voted like us, well, obviously they are smart, good people. And those people who voted for other people, well, they're obviously evil and cruel. And then there's those people who didn't vote at all. Stupid and foolish. But we don't really know many of them in terms that extend beyond demographic facts, like race or age, or rural, urban location, or patterns of voting, or party membership. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, it can be really, really easy to get into kind of a mode where you feel hatred and contempt towards those people that we know about, but who we really don't know. That's how we arrive so easily at polarized positions that serve none of us that well. Polarized relationships that are decaying the social fabric around us and that set us up for political strife and, yes, even sometimes violence. But after an election, we all still live here. All of us. After the voting, you did not go away. After the voting, I did not go away. Those people down the street with the yard sign that you utterly disagree with, they didn't go away. They're still there. We all still live here. About 2,000 years ago, a man now dubbed St. John sent out what amounts to an inter-office memo for the early church, the early Christian church. And the observations he shared in that memo are still relevant. People say they love God, who they have not seen, but they find it very easy to hate a neighbor who they do see. And there is a logic here. A very dysfunctional logic, but there's a logic here. It's really super easy to say that one loves God, even if you've never seen God, because in many circles it's an expected cliche that easily floats off the lips because saying you love God is what people expect good people to say. And hating your neighbor, who you do see, that's actually kind of easy. Not healthy, but it's easy. Because we actually see the warts and all, the bad judgment and all, the ethical flaws and all. And they also see us. So it's really easy to get in this place where the hatred is mutual. But what if? What if we really knew each other? Not just targeted information about each other, but actually knew each other. Had some kind of relationship that brings us to understand why people think and do the things that they think and do, even if we are pretty sure that they're wrong. What if we had the kind of relationships that didn't stop there, but when people are making grievous mistakes we disagree with, we bear patiently and compassionately with them for the sake of change, knowing that this is vulnerable for them and vulnerable for us, and yes, there's even a risk that things won't work out, but it's still better than a polarized world full of targeted half-truths, clever deceptions, and efforts to exercise ruthless power against those people. Now, I know this congregation well enough to know that you want a better world and that you're willing to work for it. In the past, this has meant trying to educate people, engaging in campaigns of protest, and trying to craft the perfect set of words to give witness to the things that are true. And you can do far worse than these. These are good things. But in a world of very personalized targeting that is also lacking in personal relationships, we arrive at a dangerous cul-de-sac that our culture has parked itself in. It's dangerous because we talk about one another and sometimes even select a few factual data points about each other. And sometimes we talk at each other, but we're losing our capacity to talk with one another. And we all still live here. And we hurt one another out of an ignorance born of not being in any kind of authentic relationship. Protesting is good, it is useful, but we cannot protest our way out of the cul-de-sac. Having or lacking the right education won't quite get us there either. Nobody pays attention to an educator that they no longer trust. Trust is built in relationship. The perfectly crafted set of words will not convince anybody when they don't see you as real persons. And perhaps we also do not see somebody else as a real and full person. Seeing each other as real, full human beings demands some kind of rigorous, substantive relationship. The only way forward from the dead end is through relationship building. And if you followed my spoken ministry this far, perhaps you feel it too, or suspect that there's something there. That knowing some facts about other people just isn't quite enough. That dispensing data from our own data set isn't quite enough. You might feel it too, that there must be a different and better life to seek. A different and better way to be persons, to be human. A different and better way to deploy all the knowledge, the values, what wealth we might have, our power, our culture. To do it efficiently, to allow people to build relationships. before we ever attempted to relate to one another, with or without this thing called relationship. When you were a newborn child, you were looking for another person's face. Your parents. We've been looking for other people's faces since the day we were born. It's the most primal need of human beings. From infancy until the day we die, to see one another face to face, to be understood and to understand from a place that is deeply personal, not simply personalized. Sue. For me, this is always the fun part. Because there's more to the message than what I bring, and I always walk away from these congregations with wisdom I did not have when I came to the door, or sometimes a question that leads to a future sermon here or elsewhere. So while we have time together, what ponderings are stirring in your hearts and minds?
Are you sure Pete didn't get a look at your bathroom?
With a drone?
I don't know. That always makes me nervous.
With a drone? We actually do have a bathroom we would like to remodel, but we know that bathroom remodels cost a lot of cash.
Yeah.
And we have other things on the house that require work. But it just felt like a really good example of somebody knowing a few bits about me, but not really knowing me. It's very different from, say, the neighbor I have who works for the gas company who said, "Oh, you need help with your gutters? I could loan you my 10-foot ladder." That comes from a place where he knows me, like personally. I'm not that keen to get up on a 10-foot ladder.
Well, every week I get a letter, almost every week, from somebody selling hearing aids, and I'm wondering if my wife is like talking to them or...
Oh yeah, it's they might be looking for you demographically.
I'm sure they are.
But it's a little creepy how sometimes so if you remember, you might remember from a previous visit of mine here, I recently went up to Michigan to see a friend of mine who's been in cancer treatment for stage 3 colon cancer. And when he told me that, I did an online search for stage 3 colon cancer because I couldn't remember how many stages and what all that meant. And then I started getting in my junk email a day or two after ads around cancer treatment. Google had picked up something specific that I had searched for, something about stage 3 colon cancer. But there was no personal relationship there to know that I was trying to figure out what was going on with a friend of mine as opposed to me. It is a little creepy, though.
And that's the targeted advertising that they use for politics. For somebody who has a conservative bent, then they pile on with more and more conservative information. Or if you have a liberal bent.
Well, or if you really want to play dirty, you get some very targeted data about a very specific group of people. That was the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal, where they had purchased off of Facebook data on black voters and then flooded their feed with information. I shouldn't even call it information, but statements to discourage black voters from going to the polls. That your vote doesn't matter, both candidates are racist, just stay home. And that's, again, and what is really hard for me to fathom is there's human beings making decisions behind this. Do you see these black voters as persons? because you have no relationship with them, you don't. Crystal, you want to say something?
I certainly understand and agree with your primary point. But doing it
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
is far from easy. And first of all, a relationship implies that there's a way to get the other person or people to engage in a relationship.
And if they don't want to engage you, can't control it. There are people like that. You can't engage them. Maybe there's somebody you work around. They view you with contempt, and they probably always will, and there's not much you can say to change their minds. But there are often in our orbits other people who we have something to build on. I'm not going to use this person's name. He is a relative of mine, and much to my shock, he's not an anti-vaxxer, but he is anti-COVID vaccine. I was like, can you explain to me, like, walk me through why? Like, he had to get it to keep his job, but he refuses to vaccinate his children. He thoroughly is completely convinced that the vaccine is dangerous. He says, I will jeopardize my health in order to provide for my family, but I am not going to poison my children. He is convinced that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we're going to find out that there's something horrible that it does to your body, that permanent damage. I was like, why do you think this? And I saw this thing on Facebook, and my friends at work talked to me about this thing. But he says, I also work for the government, and I can tell you, never trust anything the federal government tells you. It is lies all the way down. I stay in relationship with him from the standpoint that I love him and care about him, even though I really think he's totally wrong. And I quite reasonably think he's totally wrong. But I've also come to understand, from a little bit of sympathy, that he worked in the federal government under the previous administration when he was told a lot of things that weren't true. This is not coming from nowhere. This is the damage to our social fabric. And it takes relation. So I can't create a relationship with somebody down the street from me who won't talk to me, who has a reprehensible yard sign and doesn't want to talk to either of the two dudes down the street who are married to each other. Can't deal. There's no way. But I can be in relationship with that relative of mine. It's not easy though, because I do worry about his kids, because even my mother has had this, because my mom's got a medical background as an occupational therapist. It's just, you realize that the chance of long COVID problems is probably higher than the chance of vaccine problems. But again, this person is not interested. At least changing his mind on that thing.
Okay?
Well,
enlightening.
Thank you for your contemplative attention.
I skipped ahead on my slide, but does anybody recognize this? Do you know what this is?
Silo.
It's a silo. Very good. Must be an agricultural background. It's an unusual silo because it's a cement stage silo in really good shape, and it's a big one, as you can tell by the diameter. But for some reason, it does not have a roof. Most new cement stage silos have a roof because that's where you attach the unloader that you lower down to blow the silage out, so you don't have to get in there and pitch it out by hand. But in an abandoned silo, words for hope, a little tree seed landed and started to grow, and reaching for the light, it has become a mature tree and its canopy is now at the top of the silo. That gives us hope, gives me hope, that even in the most obscure and the most difficult circumstances, life, kind of like Jurassic Park, life will find a way. I mean, sometimes it's not always a good way, but sometimes it is a good way.
This is so fit because, you know, our existence can be very siloed. And here it is, getting out of the silo.
And
Mike, how did you know that was a silo?
I was thinking, I have two questions.
Yes.
Number one is, what's the diameter of that and how tall is that silo?
if you look at each one of these doors, is probably 3 feet between the door is like 24 to 28 inches. So if you count all the doors, you're talking, and that's not even, we're not even at the bottom of the silo. So that's why it's remarkable that it doesn't have a roof, because most new, and those staves are, oh, that's in good shape. That's a decent silo. You could use that silo.
Now my other question is, what type of tree do you think that is? Because I don't know. I don't know.
A growing one.
It's one that has a lot of energy. It does not look like the canopy of an oak. If you know what an oak is, kind of like a pyramidal type shape. So it's possibly a maple.
It's dogwood.
If you look at the bark,
You can tell the bark.
yeah, you can look at the bark. It's very firm.
There's one of those silos just outside of New Madison with a tree like that in it.
Yep.
Riplin Palestine Road. Yeah.
And if you've noticed on 121, there's actually a little tree growing out of the stump of an old tree, which I thought was pretty amazing. There was a crack when they cut the tree off flat, and there was a little tree growing out of the old tree, which is pretty amazing. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about silos is we were talking about people with thinking that is self-contained and completely erroneous. That can be called silo thinking. These people only take in the information that fits in their little circle, and they won't pay any attention. They won't listen to anything from outside. They won't listen to extraneous information, which might even be correct. So it's called silo thinking or silo behavior, because they stay in their own little group and they're all walled off from everybody else. So, just another sidelight for today. Our offering, we're going to hear Blowing in the Wind. Feel free to put something in. If you need something, feel free to take something out. And we want to give her that practice. But she got 150 some votes in Darke County and 900 and some votes in Miami County, which is pretty incredible for a write-in candidate that didn't have much exposure. So the silo and the tree, I mean, there still is hope there that education and inspiration and justice will still have an out. A little bit of history. I worked at precincts 16 and 17 in New Paris. Never have I seen so many mullets and pigtails, and it almost doesn't surprise me that those two precincts voted down the extension, not the new, but the extension of the Preble County Health Department levy to help kids get vaccinations and to help people get exams. Those people in New Paris voted that down. I haven't seen the total for the whole county. We just looked at the results for those two precincts that we went through. Interesting experience. I may speak on that a little bit in the future. So depressing on the one hand, because these are our population that we depend on to vote correctly, to help us live as a society. But kind of rewarding on the other hand, all these people took time off of work or wherever they were to come in and cast their ballot. Interestingly enough, we had some people, I'm sure most of you voted. You have the tabulating machine, and then you can take a manual ballot or you can take an electronic ballot. All the electronic ballot does is you put the little ballot paper in and you push the buttons on the computer and it just marks it for you. The manual ballot, we had multiple people. Their ballot tabulation was rejected because they didn't make the circles dark enough or they went outside the circle or whatever. So the electronic one is just easier. There's no connection to the internet. But we had people come in and say, I'm taking the manual ballot because nobody's going to change my ballot from Venezuela or China or something. And you kind of smile and say, you see that tabulator that you're sticking your vote in to count? That's the electronic part. So whether you think you're voting electronically or not, in Ohio, your vote is tabulated electronically. It just comes out on a tape. It's not connected to the internet and nobody sends it anywhere, but it is still connected to the internet. So the misinformation is still there, even in Little New Paris. All right, our final hymn is 186. We should all try to learn, for one can show us how to live, the other what to spurn. Be fair to people when they err. When good your pleasure show, their faults be quick to understand. In judging them, be slow. But this above all else obey, it is the best of goals. What you would wish not done to you, do not to other souls. Words to live by. All right. Our final reading is 694 in the back of your hymnal. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. Frederick Giles. All right, our postlude is Poor Butterfly. There are day-olds there and hot coffee. Be careful when you go out. The sidewalks actually have melted, but there still might be snow and slippery, and it's going to be a cold week, so bring in the brass monkeys. So remember the monarchs as they wend their way to Mexico, they are definitely under threat. That ends our service at New Madison, First Universalist. Have a good week. If you need something, please let us know.